Welcome for joining us tonight. Welcome to the Further Education Showcase. My name is Elen Chan. I'm one of the career counselor at the Academic Advising and Career Center at UTSC. And tonight I have the pleasure of moderating the Law School Panel. We're really lucky to have 4 Ontario Law School representatives joining us to share information with us. At this point, I would like to turn it over to Sarah to do our land acknowledgement.
We wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates.
For thousands of years,
it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat,
the Seneca,
and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit.
Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island.
And we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land.
Thank you. And at this point, I would like to turn the mic over to our 4 panelists joining us tonight and give them a chance to introduce themselves. And if it's okay, let's start with Jerome representing U of T.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jerome Poontang. I'm the Senior Recruitment, Admissions and Diversity Outreach Officer for the Faculty of Law at the University of Toronto. I'll hand it over to Vicky.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Vicky Fekleris. I'm the Recruitment and Admissions Coordinator at Osgoode Hall Law School for the JD program. Hand it off to Tara.
Hi, everybody. My name is Terry Egan Wu. I'm the Director of Admissions and Recruitment at the Lincoln Alexander School of Law at the soon-to-be renamed Ryerson University. And off to Spencer.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm the Admissions and Recruitment Associate at Western Law, and I work with Danielle Lacasse, and I'm glad that I can be here to promote our amazing law school to talented people such as yourselves.
Thank you to all of you. So without further ado, I would like to start with our first questions to the students. We have several questions prepared, so we will go through them first. But we will also have breakout rooms later with each of the representatives, giving you a more intimate setting to ask any individual questions you may have. So if it's okay for me to start with the first question, can you all please give an overview of the admission process at your law school, including some of the application components and how they're evaluated? So again, if it's okay, can we start with you, Jerome?
Yes, thanks, Elen. For anyone interested in applying to one of the 8 Ontario law schools, the good thing is it's a very convenient process. You submit all application materials, not to the law schools, but actually to an application center called OLSAS, the Ontario Law School Application Service. So all documents go there. The application form is online and it opens the August prior to your starting year at any of the Ontario law schools. So for example, if you wanted to start in 2022, August of 2021 is when the application form will be open. So on the application form, you provide your usual information, contact information, your name, date of birth, some demographic information, the choice of which of the 8 Ontario law schools you have an interest in. You will also provide an autobiographical sketch, which is a summary listing of your activities you've completed since high school. And then for individual schools, any sort of essays or personal statements that they would like you to draft, you enter those directly on the application form. It's not an upload. And then for our friends at Lincoln Alexander, they have a video interview they'll ask you to do, but we'll talk about that in a while. But on the form itself, everything that you need to do, including arranging for transcripts and arranging for any letters of reference, you put that information yourself on the application form and you pay for it with a credit card, and just don't miss the November 1st application deadline. That's the basic process for all of us. Is there anything special with regards to anything that any of us will ask you for? Some of us may or may not ask you for references. Some of us may or may not do interviews. Some of us may or may not ask for a certain quantity of essays, but all those instructions are actually listed on the Application Center's website. There's an application instruction guide, and you just need to take the time to go through each of the 8 Ontario law schools that you have an interest in. All the details are there, all the procedures are there. Just take your time first reading the instructions before you do any submissions. Did I miss anything, anyone?
Thank you. So I'm wondering if we can ask each of the representative to highlight a little bit more about what students are often worried about. How do you calculate admission GPA?
Okay, so I'll start. We'll go in sequence. So for the U of T, for the calculation, we're looking at everything you've done in terms of undergraduate courses, no matter how many years of undergrad you've done. Graduate courses are not included in the GPA. Summer courses are not included in the GPA, but it doesn't mean they have zero value. It just means they're not in the particular math we're using for the way we calculate our GPA. So of all the years of undergrad, we're looking at the best 3 years of a full-time enrollment, which is not the same as full load enrollment. So while you were full-time, we're looking at the best 3 years, and that's what we use to calculate. I'll go next in line to Vicky.
Thanks, Jerome. So at OSCE, we look at your overall GPA, so all your undergraduate studies. We include summer into that. We factor summer courses and scores into that calculation. If you've graduated or are taking additional courses at the undergraduate level, we factor those in as well. If you have grad work, college, any other, it's all looked at. Certainly, it just doesn't get rolled into that generic GPA calculation. OLSAS is the one that does the calculations for us. You can find a conversion chart on their website. It's very handy. You can kind of calculate it on your own and see what they come out as. So we're looking at the overall. We do also do a best 2-year function just to get a snapshot of your best performance, because we do certainly consider factors, contributions, experiences, time constraints, other obligations, a lot of things you could talk about in the application and your personal statement. I'm not sure if we're going to cover like categories or if that's going to be in the breakout rooms, but we do have a general application category and Indigenous. We have no other categories, so we kind of have a part B of the personal statement where you identify other discretionary factors. They're outlined in more detail on our website and through OLSAS, so you can take a look there. So I'll pass on to Tara.
Absolutely. So for GPA, to keep it simple, we do the best basically 20 credit equivalents. So that's about 2 years, but it doesn't have to be done in the same year. So we're not just looking at, year 3 and year 4. We're not looking at whole years. We'll take, assuming it's a 40 credit degree, which is what a standard sort of 4-year bachelor's would be. We would look at your best 20 credits to calculate your GPA for our law school. And Spencer.
Yeah, at Western Law, we look at your last 2 years of admission of undergraduate study. So whether that's your 4th and 5th year or a 3rd and 4th year, it also is equivalent to your last 20 courses that you've taken. So if you haven't taken a full course load in your last few years of school, we'll dip back into your previous years, and we'll also look at your undergraduate CGPA.
Thank you to all. So as you can see, it really may be different from school to school. So please do refer to OLSAS and make sure you look into and investigate how each school have their different admission requirements. Again, if we can go through each individual school, can you talk a little bit about how important is the LSAT score?
Right. So the LSAT is a test of thinking and reasoning. It is not a test of legal information, so no prior law knowledge is required for doing well on the LSAT, and no particular subject matter is required for doing well on the LSAT. So it doesn't matter what you're studying at school, that doesn't prevent you from doing well on the LSAT. You will practice past questions to get familiarity with the different question types and keep practicing until you are confident that you're scoring at the level you would like to score at consistently on mock practice tests to make yourself happy. With regards to proportionality, let's just go down the line first, everyone, quickly, just to give a sense of, in terms of the 3 elements that all the law schools that will be looking for selection, which would be your post-secondary academic record, the LSAT performance and sort of person profile information, how would each of us quickly just proportion those for the selection? So for U of T, the quantitative elements, the things that have numbers associated with them, the academic record and the LSAT, that's 2/3 of your consideration, and the remaining 1/3 is the non sort of numerical stuff from the person profile. Osgood, would you give your proportions first?
We don't have any specific weightings for any areas of the application. It's like all the schools, somewhat holistic and comparative. People have different paths that got themselves to this point to apply to law school. So we certainly do want to see something strong in terms of your numbers, whether it's the LSAT, whether it's your GPA or snapshot of your GPA. Just wanting to set you up for success. But also we're considering your contributions, experiences, factors as well. So there's really no actual, but those are the 3 general areas, but I can't say with any certainty that there's an equal amount attributed to each. There's also an interview process that, you could be called upon for an interview. So just try and make those 3 areas as strong as possible. Tara?
Yeah, same at Lincoln Alexander. So we don't have a set weighting. I will say it's probably less than some of the other law schools. We do look at some of the other factors more heavily. And I would say GPA for us is more important than the LSAT. Spencer?
Yes, with Western law, the LSAT is only one part of your application. So we look at the other factors holistically, like you all said, and we want to look for well-rounded people to round out our 185 class members.
Okay, thank you, Spencer. Quick, if we go back down the line, we're still on the LSAT. In the event that folks take the LSAT more than once, firstly, let's figure out, do we average? Do we take the highest attempt? What do we do? So at U of T, we will use the highest attempt in our consideration. Osgood?
Highest score there as well.
Tara?
Highest score for us as well.
Spencer, Western?
Yep, highest score, and we consider the average.
Well, those are 2 very different things. So you also look at the average and the highest score.
Right.
Okay. Let's do one more thing. It's really important to also note how late of an LSAT was the last possible LSAT in the entry year, the application year, that will be acceptable for a specific law school. It's not universal. So be really, really careful about that. And the latest LSAT acceptable could be after the application deadline. So for OLSAS, if that's the case, you want to, on the application form, indicate your LSAC number, which is how the law schools get your LSAT score in the first instance, and then indicate any future test that you will be taking after the application deadline. And you're free to go in at any point on the application and change that information the month and the year. So if you decide to add on a test after, you can do that. If you decide to no longer do a test, you can also remove it. So for us at U of T, in your application year, the last acceptable LSAT will be the January LSAT of the entry year. That works for us in terms of selection. Osgood, what works for you as the last acceptable?
That's the same for us as well. So if you're applying for next year, the last valid test will be this coming January. Same.
Okay. Tara?
Same for us as well. January is the last valid. However, we do strongly encourage November would be more ideal, but we will still consider January.
And Spencer?
Yeah, we'll look at the February LSAT as well as the January LSAT.
Okay, so you go up to February, the rest of us will go up to January, but again, double check individual schools, no matter where they are in the world, that are using the LSAT, because it's not universal. Okay, so that's, Elin, that's good for us on the LSAT, I presume, unless there's anything else specifically on the LSAT you would like us to address.
No, I think that was great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
So if we can move on to the next section, which is, do you require references? If so, can you give the students some ideas about what makes a strong reference?
Okay. Well, the good thing for U of T is that we don't ask for any letters of reference or letters of recommendation. So if you hand it in for us, we're simply not going to read it. So I'll step back from this question because it doesn't pertain to us, and I'll hand it over to Osgood because they do ask for references.
Thanks, Jerome. Yes, we require 2 letters of reference. We strongly recommend that one be academic. They can both be academic, but we definitely want one to be an academic letter of reference. And a person who can write that would be anybody who directly taught you, your professor, your teaching assistant, even if they have a significant role in, teaching you, marking your work, evaluating you. Don't mistake academic reference letters like, oh, the dean knows me, or I've worked with the dean, or I've studied with the dean. unless a dean taught you, that wouldn't count as an academic reference, but your other reference can be academic. It could be from a volunteer capacity, employment, anything else like that. I wouldn't go as far as to get like a personal character reference. Really last resort. Try to get somebody who can attest to your academic and non-academic abilities. Tara?
So we also require 2 references, also strongly recommend academic, at least one, hope maybe both. And the only tip I would give is make sure that when you're asking for your references, that you give them lots of time, because especially if you are currently a student, if you're asking a professor, they may have 10, 15, 50 people asking them for reference letters. And if you say, I need a reference letter by Friday, that may not happen. It may also, if it does happen, it may affect the quality of the reference letter that you receive. So be kind to your references. Start thinking now, even if you're a year out, about who might be a reference. Ask them if they're willing to give you a reference. Don't just assume. And then make sure you give that lots of time to make sure that ideally they have time to write a high quality reference for you. Spencer?
Great, yeah, and we at Western Law, we require 1 academic reference and 1 reference that's non-academic, or you can have an academic reference as your second reference, but we do require 1 academic reference. And we want to see someone who knows you as an applicant rather than who the person is in terms of status. So that's one tip that I can give for references.
Okay, thanks. And just to bear in mind, on the OLSAS application form for the 8 Ontario Law Schools, well, at least the 7 that will require references, on the application form, you are responsible for submitting the names and contact information for the referees by that November 1st deadline. And then the application system will contact the referees directly with the instructions on what they're supposed to do. So the references are supposed to come from the referees directly to the application center. You're never supposed to see what the referees are supposed to say. It's supposed to be confidential. The other thing to note, which we didn't sort of mention on this, so I'm just going to, sorry, Elaine, just sidetrack just for a little bit, is to talk about a very important component of that sort of personal profile information, which are the essays that you need to write. And so we all require some sort of personal statement or sort of essay where you do a bit of self-reflection and describe yourself to the selection folks. We will have totally different lengths. And then at OLSAS, we express it in terms of the number of characters, not number of words. And so if it's a key on your keyboard that you have to press, then it's a character. Plain and simple, that's the way to know. So a space is a character because you have to touch a space bar. The other thing to note too is that the quantity of essays may vary from school to school. Sometimes the essays may be open-ended or they may be asking you to talk about specific topics. So what you want to do is before you start writing essays, you want to take the time to actually go through each of the law schools you have an interest in, read up on what they are asking you to provide, and make sure you do follow those instructions and provide what they actually ask you to provide. So quickly, just for us at U of T, for everybody applying, there's a mandatory personal statement that is open-ended, 5,000 characters. Then there's an optional essay everybody has, 2,500 characters with 4 specific topics. So you can read up at those at the U of T website. And then for anyone who is self-identifying as a Black student, we have a Black student application process where there is a mandatory essay if you're self-identifying as Black for that at the U of T also. So Osgood, tell us about your essays, your personal statements, mandatory, not mandatory, lengths, and any topics to talk about.
All right, thanks, Jerome. So Osgood has 2 parts to the personal statement, part A and B. Part A has 2 subsections, so they're 2,000 characters each. You can't kind of do 1 4,000 character essay. We actually do break you. So the first part of part A is essentially like what brought you to this point to apply, and there's examples of things you can discuss. So what's going to make you a good JD student? Tie in some academic, non-academic elements there, things you're proud of. It could have been an event in your life. Just tell us your story, really be genuine and be personal. The second part of part A is, what is it you want to do with this degree? What are your goals at this time? What interests do you have in the law right now? You don't have to have any prior law knowledge, like Jerome said. Just tell us what the interest is now. Definitely talk about why Osgood and all the schools you're applying to. It's a really good idea to tailor your personal statements to the schools that you've done some research and can touch on some programming or something special about the school. Then part B of the personal statement is 2,500 characters, and that's an optional section. Like I mentioned before, we only have the two application categories, but we still consider all the factors that other schools will have listed as categories. We used to have categories. So there's performance considerations that affected or compromise any term of study while you're an undergrad or a post-secondary or your LSAT, equity, which is a big umbrella. You can go into more detail on the website, diversity and work-life experiences. But that's typically for folks that have 5 or more years out of full-time studies. So again, you talk about all your discretionary factors there, so you get consideration for those.
Tara?
So for our essay, we have 2 required essays, also 5,000 characters and 2,500 characters. The first one is around why law, why now, why Lincoln Alexander? And the second question is more telling us about yourself, your strengths and your weaknesses, and then relevant experience. And that can be lived experience, work experience, volunteer experience, and how you think that will contribute. So those are our 2 essay questions.
Right, and you do something unique, which the other Ontario law schools don't do, which is you have a video interview component. Can you touch on that quickly?
Absolutely, really quickly. So we do a pre-recorded video interview. After you apply, you're given a link. Everybody is invited to interview who applies. Do note that there is a timeline. You have 2 weeks from receiving that invite to do the online interview. So it is time sensitive. So make sure that you're aware of that. Basically, we ask you a few pre-recorded questions. We have our students who have recorded the questions. They're not going to be about law or anything specific. They're there to learn more about you and to for an opportunity for you to sort of orally communicate to us. And there's also one written question, which would be a sample email that we'd ask you to write. It is time constricted. You always have time to read the question. The question is read to you. You have time to think about it, and then you record your response.
Thanks. Western, Spencer?
Great. So at Western, we have 2 mandatory parts of the personal statement. Part A is 5,000 characters, and that's your opportunity to best represent yourself for the admissions committee and best portray yourself as a strong candidate. That's essentially what it's for. Part B is a 2,000 characters, and that's more of an open artistic area where you can talk about a piece of art that you like or that inspires you, or a situation that you've overcame, an uncomfortable situation or something like that. And for part C, this is diving into the different types of categories and the special categories we have. But if you are applying under one of our discretionary categories, part C, we have 1,000 words, 1,000 characters, where you have to discuss your special circumstance and the considerations that go along with that. So I hope that helps.
Great. So just to let everyone know, for all the law schools in Ontario, you are entering the information, the text for the personal statements and essays directly on the application form as free text. You're not uploading a document. There's no special formatting allowed, no characters, no special fonts, no underlining, no emojis, no HTTPS links, no URLs, just the plain text, and the content is the most important thing. And then secondly, all of us in Ontario will have space. We'll give you the space on your personal statements and essays to tell us about any sort of extenuating circumstances that may have affected any part of your application files. So that's where you tell us if anything you think it's important for us to know, if there's anything anomalous or circumstances that we should be aware of. Okay, Elin, sorry about that sort of tangent.
No, that was great. Thank you so much. We have some questions coming through the chat, so I'm going to try to combine some of them. If we can circle back to the LSAT, a student is wondering, is there any benefit to taking the LSAT earlier? And also having to do with the LSAT, a student is wondering, is there an average LSAT score that might mean a better chance at acceptance?
Okay, the key thing to know about the LSAT test is that the score that you get has a shelf life of 5 years. So one of the top questions we get is, when's the best time to take the LSAT? Well, the best time to take the LSAT is to start first with what year you would like to enter the law school and give yourself 5 years earlier than that. So you have a 5-year window. Nothing says you have to do it the year you apply to law school. You have 5 years before you want to start at your disposal. So just take your time and prepare accordingly. But it's up to you to do it as you see fit. With regards to doing it earlier, as Tara mentioned or Vicky mentioned, we would like you to probably think about doing it earlier rather than waiting until the very last acceptable test as your first test. Because if for some reason you have to skip that test, you get in an accident or something, then you've totally disqualified yourself for that application cycle because the school said that was your last acceptable test. So don't cut it so close. Avoid that. But because you have a 5-year window, it's easy to avoid that. So please do so. And we'll just go through everybody quickly, just in terms of the sort of LSAT scores. The LSAT is scored from 120 to 180. So within that 120 to 180 score range, what may make a student, again, we don't know, we can't predict ahead of time, but generally what sort of puts them in the breathe easy, nothing's guaranteed, but in the breathe easy range. So for us at U of T, anything in the 160 and above is a breathe easy. Again, nothing's guaranteed. We have students with lesser LSAT scores, but 160 and above is a breathe easy. Osgood, what's a breathe easy for you?
I would say it's similar. It's at 80th percentile. The raw scores kind of adjust from year to year or sitting to sitting. So around the 160, 80th percentile or better. I think the most common time people will write the LSAT between 3rd and 4th year, just because we get a lot of people applying to law school when they're starting 4th year. So if you do it in the summer, you're giving yourself a couple extra tests before the deadline, even after the deadline, like backup tests, which is I think good, and you're outside of your full-time year, so you have like maybe less courses you're doing and you can focus more on the LSAT. So yeah, Tara?
So I would say it's a little harder for us to give that breathe easy because one, we're so new that we don't have that historical data, but also we do weigh it a little bit less. We have turned down applicants who have a 170 plus, and we've admitted students that are in the 140 range. That's very, very rare. And so I will say the higher your score, the better your chances. But if you had a 180, that does not mean you're automatically admitted because we do look pretty holistically, as I'm sure all the schools do.
All right, Spencer?
Yeah, Western Law would like to see scores in the 80th percentile also, and that's what makes a competitive candidate. And just like everyone else says, that's not a cutoff by any means, but it's what we want you to shoot for.
Right, and just to explain to everybody what the percentile means, when you take the LSAT test and you get a score from 120 to 180, but they also tell you, the test makers, how well you did relative to the other test makers over the past 3 years globally on the planet. So if you scored in a healthy percentile on your individual test, that's a global positioning, which means that use that to determine if it's worthwhile to repeat or retake the LSAT. If you scored, for example, in the 80th or 85th, that means you're in the top 20 or top 15 on the planet over the past 3 years taking the test. Does that really warrant spending $200 US to redo the test when you're top 15 in the world? So what else could you be top 15 in the world on and think that's not good enough? So think about it in those realistic terms, okay? The last thing I want to say about the LSAT before we move on back to Elin is that some of the law schools in Ontario and across Canada actually hold free summer prep programs for undergrad students at any undergrad school. So certainly I know Osgood does it, U of T does it, Western does it. Lincoln Alexandra is a bit too new to start one just yet, but I'm sure they'll get on it soon enough. Ottawa started this year, University of Alberta, University of Calgary, and UBC. So across Canada, these are online, this past year because of COVID, they were online virtual courses, not limited to students at those particular schools. So you could be a student at any undergrad school and apply to do the free prep program in the summer across any of those Canadian schools that offer it. And it's free for certainly low-income students, and there may be other eligibility categories. So double check their websites. And we normally open applications sometime in the winter term, February, March-ish, to start those summer courses sometime May or June, depending on the particular school. So take a look at that later on. Thanks, Elin. Sorry.
Thank you, Jerome. And Khan Academy is another great resource for LSAT preparation too.
And that's completely free 24/7 online.
Yes. If we can also circle back to references, we have a few questions about references. So one is the student, I think, in reference to academic reference, does it matter what level the professor taught you at? Like, is, for example, a 4th year course professor more valuable than a 1st year class professor?
I think Spencer touched on that in saying, can you re-say what you said, Spencer? You said it really nicely.
Oh, for sure. Well, we're interested in what the person says about you rather than their status in society or in academia. So we use the references, those OSU's references. It's another way for us to get to know you as an applicant, essentially, and to know your skills. So if that's sufficient.
Yeah, I think the premise to references, although U of T doesn't take it, we're familiar with the concept of them, is that you want someone who can say something really good and strong and positive and not generic things about you. So if you pick somebody who has just a good title who doesn't know you really well, that's never going to be as strong as someone who doesn't have such a grand title, but can say really good things of more of a firsthand nature about you. That's more effective. Any comments, Vicky or Tara, about that?
I was just going to say, like, if you're a first year course and it's 1,000 students and the professor's just rattling off your grade, that's not a reference letter. So you want to, use your TA, or maybe in your second, third year where you have smaller classes and they know you better and you meet once a week. That's a better choice. Definitely qualitative over, quantitative, however you want to take that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, so I think Vicky covered off a lot of the different admission category they have at OSCQA. So just wondering to the other school representative, is there any category of admission that you would like the students to know? Back to Jerome.
Yeah, well, all the Canadian law schools will have at least these three categories. There's going to be an Indigenous category, which refers to Canadian Indigenous folks with Canadian Indigenous heritage. Just be wary that some of the law schools, depending on the schools, may ask for proof of that heritage with the status card or something similar to that. So just be aware of that. There is always going to be a mature applicant category you'll find at the Canadian law schools, which refers to folks who spend some time away from education. It doesn't mean they have no education necessarily, but it just means there is at least a total somewhere since they finished high school of about 5 years accumulated before they're looking at starting at law school. And then everyone else generally falls into the general category, which will be most applicants. And then some law schools may have a discretionary category where they want to sort of suss out folks with specific sorts of extenuating circumstances or inequity issues, where they may call them discretionary categories or access categories. And then some of us may have different sort of application processes for certain types of applicants, like we would have one for Black identified candidates, where we have a slightly different process of reviewing their applications, but we have the category, well, not the category, but the self-identification, so that it's easier to tell who those folks are, but the criteria are all the same and there's not a necessary relaxation of requirements. So for U of T, like everyone else, general, mature, Indigenous. And then in addition, we have a Black student application process, which is not an applicant category, but a process of evaluation of their personal profiles. Osgood, your categories once again?
We have the general category and Indigenous. It doesn't mean that when you want to talk about your factors, you have to do that in part B of the personal statement. So we want you to kind of see part B. If it applies to you, talk about your factors. Could be all those things that I had mentioned before, and then move on to your application. What had happened years ago before our policy change, we had all these categories. People weren't aware of the categories. They didn't have these wonderful virtual presentations to kind of break them down. And people were just applying as general, and then they were talking about stuff in their application. They were just a calculation at the end of the day. So we've changed the whole thing so that everybody's looked at as general playing field. But you're focusing on your factors in the personal statement. This is why it takes us a long time to go through all the applications, and they all get read. So you want to just talk about whatever's applicable there, and don't be shy and like, oh, I don't want to talk about that. I want to get in on merit alone. Really just tell us it's confidential. There's other folks getting consideration for it. We want to see your successes and how you've overcome these factors. If you're ready for studying law. Sometimes your factors have a lot to do with why you want to go to law school. Sometimes they don't. So you can kind of, roll that all in a nicely written personal statement. But those are our categories. And yeah, we will, diversity is a big one as well. Like, it's any way you identify with that word. Equity is huge. It's all about financial, economic. I think some in the chats, what are discretionary cases? So, financial hardships, family, cultural, social, disabilities, physical, sensory, psychological. Equity is a really big one. These are systemic barriers that you've had over the years that are beyond your control. And anywhere you can kind of corroborate that or provide any kind of supporting documentation, it's great. We know that you can't always corroborate everything, but that would be good. And then performance consideration, I think everybody kind of touched on too, is if there was something that compromised your grades, a really bad semester, or you changed your program and did really well, or just you're in school for 3, 4, sometimes 5 years of undergrad, and a lot can happen. So we definitely want to know about any ups and downs. So it's don't leave the guesswork to us about on your data sheet when we see different kinds of grades all over the place. Let us know about that story, and it also applies to LSAT as well.
Tara, Tara, categories.
We have the general and the Indigenous. Mature students is not a separate category, but mature students can apply to either the Indigenous or the general categories.
Good. Spencer, Western.
Yes, so we have the access category, we have the Indigenous category like everyone else, and we have the mature category. The access category is interesting because you can discuss any barriers you may have faced along the way or throughout your time at school. So that's great. And we also have different eligibility requirements for each of those. So for instance, if you're a mature student, you only need 2 years of school of university, and if you're applying through the access category, we only require you to have 1 year of competitive grades because of the different circumstances surrounding you. So if you all have any questions about those different categories and you don't want to drop them into the chat, you can feel free to reach out to every school, and we'll be happy to discuss this with you too.
All right, can I just do one quick side question, if you don't mind, Elaine? Sometimes folks, because they see there are different applicant categories on the application form, jump to an assumption that there are quotas for the different types of candidates in each categories. So let's just go through quickly and see if that's actually the case. So at UFT, no, regardless of category, there are no quotas for any type of applicant. Osgood?
No, we've only got the 2, and we welcome Indigenous applicants. The more the better.
Thank you. Tara?
No quotas, none.
Spencer?
No quotas over here.
Good. Okay, thanks. Elaine, back to you.
Thank you. We now have some questions coming in through the chat having to do with the extracurricular non-academic component. So if wondering if just each school can share a little perspective on how important is it, what do you look for in terms of non-academic component? Are there preferred extracurricular activity that you look for?
Okay, so again, the 3 criteria: your post-secondary academic record, your LSAT performance, and your person profile. So all the things that you will do activity-wise will fall into that person profile category, and they're all kind of, collected as, with the essays and so on and so forth to get a sense of you, the person, what you're passionate about, what you're interested in, what makes you tick, those sort of questions about it. So whether it's reflected in something a school may do like a co-curricular record or not, it's not the point. That's a physical construct of listing the things that you will already list in your autobiographical sketch on the application form. Law schools are not looking for any specific sort of activity anybody must have done, because everybody's individualistic, everybody has different lives, everybody has different experiences. So we just want you to tell us your story. We want to know your individual makeup and composition and what you're interested in, and that alone will provide the uniqueness that you sometimes hear law schools are saying, you should be unique. Well, there are a billion people in China, trust me, and they're not all the same. So the key thing to note is just by you being you and doing the things that you are personally interested in will already by default be unique. Just express it in a way that makes sense for us to understand who you are and what you're all about. And that information will help lead or lend or inform that information. So if it's a list we're asking you for, just list it. Don't overthink this at all. That's as much as I can say with regards to anything along those lines. In some instances, you cannot have every possible experience. Some students I know cannot do clubs and associations because they have to work because they're socioeconomic status. That's fine. So you're welcome to tell us that's a situation if you think it warrants information, but we will even see that from the sketch because you would see listed only employment. So we can do the math on that. So don't get too worked up or agitated over having to have some sort of perfect concept of an experience. Everything you do has value. Just give us a sense of what that is. Anyone else to comment on that?
I think you did it perfectly, Jerome.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
The only thing I would say is that absolutely, and that, we all appreciate diversity, and that also comes from experience. So we're not only looking for violin players, or we're not only looking for varsity athletes. We want people of a whole wide range. So absolutely tell us what you do, but also there's not one thing that we're looking for because we want that diversity. We want people with different experiences.
Yeah, if everybody was the same at law school, that would be the most boring experience on the planet. We want people to be well, not completely different, but we want people to have differences so that when you're examining cases, you're coming with different perspectives, looking at the same law, and that's what makes law and laws even stronger, having people with different perspectives. So again, be you. That's all we ask you to do. You do you. How's that?
Sounds great. So I know there are a lot of questions students are putting through the chat. Not necessarily every single one is going to get answered, but we do have the breakout room later on. So you are, more than welcome to post those questions again to the different representatives. So if it's okay, I would like to move to our final question for the panelists in our larger setting. Can you offer one piece of advice to students who are interested in applying to law schools that can make them more competitive?
Oh, make them more competitive. I think one thing that you should always consider is that don't feel that you are obligated to have to start law school as soon as your undergrad is finished. All too often people think the second my undergrad is finished, I have to get into law school. So therefore they, kill themselves to get everything done when they may not be ready for law school. For example, you may not be ready yet for scoring consistently well as you would like to on the LSAT. Don't force yourself into an application with a weak performance in something. So nothing says that you have to start law school as soon as you finish your undergrad. There is no rule. No law school says that anywhere on the planet. It's education. So the oldest person I know who started at U of T was 53 years old. Obviously, they didn't just finish their undergrad and start. So again, don't feel any pressure thinking your life in law school has to start at this exact point in your life. We don't care as the law school. We're not judging you by your age. Age is not a factor for selecting you at the law school. So you come when you're ready instead of trying to force yourself to come and then getting all disappointed because you weren't quite ready and you didn't get in. So again, pace yourself, know yourself, and come when you're ready. We're not going anywhere. The law schools are going to be around. Vicky, anything you can say?
I always say just be genuine, be personal. That's your chance to kind of market yourself, but you don't also want to write a personal statement that's every sentence begins with the letter I, right? So it's kind of like you're interviewing, but at the same time, just tell us your story. Like it's really simple in terms of that, but take care of your personal statement. Make sure when you're tailoring it, you're watching your grammar, you're making sure you're saying, Osgood, not Ottawa, like it's happened. We've seen it, the O schools. Have somebody read it, have your friends read it. Maybe they'll say like, oh, why didn't you talk about this thing we did, that fundraiser? No commitment is too small or too big or too long. So really throw it all in there. It's real estate. It's very valuable real estate. There's only so much of it. The characters, it's not a lot. So I think it's going to be your first lesson in law. I mean, I was never a law student. From what I hear, you have to shrink a lot of information down to a small one, sheet of paper. So it's a true exercise in writing, and yeah, just make it personal and genuine. And this is your shot. But I agree with Jerome. Don't feel like it's a race. I have people saying, oh, I have to apply this year. Everybody's applying this. You don't. Like, give yourself time. People take a whole year to study for the LSAT. Fourth year is hard enough, or finishing your grad program is hard enough, like space things out. If you need to take a course for the LSAT, give yourself time to take the course. I know I wouldn't be able to do the LSAT study on my own. I need to regiment myself. So think about all these things. If you're applying this year, good luck. If you're applying in future years, good for you for coming to these presentations and planning ahead.
Good. Tara?
So one of the things I always suggest is to really be thoughtful before you start all the applications and all that busy craziness starts, as to think about, why do I want to do law? Do I want to do law? To do some research, to talk to lawyers, to talk to law students. We all host events, we all have student panels. Attend as many as you can, because I think if you go into the applications with that idea of not just like, well, my parents say I need to be a lawyer, therefore I'm applying, you understand what you're looking for in a school, you understand more about yourself, you may understand what values you bring to the law school. So do take that time before that application starts, because if you're applying to 4 schools, that's a lot of applications, there's a lot of things you need to do, there's a lot of deadlines, that could be overwhelming. So before you start that process, just take this time to think about, why law, why now, why me? And that will help inform the essays, that will help inform your choices, that will help inform the questions that you ask. And you'll get a lot more out of it, I think, if you've already put that thought and effort into it, rather than just assuming law school because it's a fancy degree, and then not having put the thought into it on the front end.
Good. Spencer, thoughts?
Yeah, for sure. So we would suggest at Western Law to apply when you're ready, and apply when you can put your best foot forward. We'd also say that we'd like you to focus on your strengths as an applicant throughout the process, and then focus on what you did well in your past and in your scores and in your personal experiences, and that will help carry you through this long process.
Good. I have one other thing for folks to bear in mind is that, to be a lawyer, you have to, beyond getting the legal education from the JD degree, you also have to be licensed to practice. And so just please bear in mind that in Canada, the licensing authorities are not the schools. Schools do not license you. They're the law societies in each of the 10 provinces and the 3 territories, and they set the requirements for being licensed. The good thing to know about Canada is that within Canada itself, there's a high degree of portability of that license from one province to other provinces. The exception would be Quebec because they do civil law. But for everybody else, there's a high degree of portability. So please, we always see a lot of GTA students who, for the life of them, only think I can only go to law school in the GTA because that's where I'm from. Don't limit yourselves. I would rather you apply broadly to a good range of law schools and maximize your ability to be competitive, and then have the luxury of choice of saying, oh, I got into X number of schools, now I can pick which one I want to go to, rather than over limiting yourself in the get-go, only applying to 1 or 2, and then if it doesn't work out, then you go, something's wrong with me. No, the key thing is, if you want to become a lawyer, you have to go to a law school, not a specific law school. So by over limiting your chances doesn't get you closer to your goal. You need to get into some law school. So let's think about that bigger goal first, and bear in mind that it's okay for you to go to school in Saskatchewan and then practice in Ontario after. It's perfectly fine. So don't over limit yourself by geography for becoming a lawyer, particularly in Canada, because it's a high degree of portability based on getting a degree. And you can get a degree from somewhere else and then be licensed in Ontario. You don't even have to be licensed locally where you get your degree. You can get your degree anywhere else and then still follow Ontario's licensing requirements to become licensed. So, think about maximizing your options, not limiting yourself from the get-go if you want to become a lawyer. Okay, England, back to you.
Thank you, Jerome. That was great advice. We also have some questions because we have maybe a few minutes to spare. We have some questions about how do you specialize, or how do you can specialize in the area of law? So I'm wondering if one of you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, the great thing about law is that the application form doesn't ask you what type of lawyer you want to be or force you into making a decision before you get into law school. The first year of the JD degree across Canada is a common first year of courses, and they're all the foundational areas of law that every Canadian lawyer needs to know. So when you come into first year of law school in the JD program in Canada, they basically hand you your schedule because everybody's doing the same courses. So it's unlike your undergrad where you have to get up at 4 a.m. to get your time slice and Rosie or Acorn to pick your courses, and then you try to not schedule classes on Fridays or not in evenings. No, first year they hand you your schedule. Everybody's doing the same thing. And then essentially what first year will do for you will help you decide not necessarily which areas of law you actually will like, but more importantly, in which areas of law you really don't like. So if there's one aspect of the foundational areas of law you're sort of not so hot about, you're not going to do, you're going to stay away from that in the upper years. So over the 3 years of the program, the first year gives you a sense of, yeah, maybe I like this, maybe I'm not so hot about this. And then the final 2 years, you actually pick individual courses that'll suit your sort of interest in the areas of law. Invariably, law schools don't tend to have majors and minors and concentrations or specialists that you would find in the same way at the undergrad. It's mainly an assortment of courses that deal with different areas of law, and you pick and choose the individual courses based on your personal interests, and you sort of fine tune it as you go along. Of course, there will be some degree requirements on things that everybody will have to do, administrative law and things like oral advocacy, but they usually give you a broad range of sort of courses to satisfy any sort of degree requirements. So there's a lot of flexibility there. So the beautiful thing about law is that, again, We don't say which school you have to go to. We don't say which academic program before law you have to get into. The LSAT test is not a test of subject matter, it's just a test of thinking, which means from any pre-law area, you could be perfectly fine. We don't even ask you what type of law you need to get into, you want to do before you get into law school. If you do, if you know, fine. If you don't know, perfectly fine too. It doesn't affect you at the application stage. When you come into first year, you don't have to have your lives decided. Just take the mandatory first year, which you'll have to do. And then you still have the freedom to actually make it up as you go along. So at this point, all we're asking you for is to be open-minded when you come into law and to have an interest in the law, not as having a specific interest in the law at this point in time. If you do, great, but if you don't, that's okay too. Invariably, 8 times out of 10, folks change their minds when they get into law school and see all the full range of all the options available at that school. Having said that, schools may cluster some areas to make it easier for you if you're looking at a certain practice area. But you're not bound to that. You can mix and match areas to be as multidimensional or as unidimensional as you see fit. So it's very flexible for you. Anybody wants to add to that in terms of covering that sort of concern?
Sure. Just as an aside, Western Law has curricular streams that you can choose from after your first year. So you can do a bit of a specialization, but it's not required of you. It's based on interest, and I'm not sure if the other schools have it, but I'm sure there
Right,
are to some degree.
And it's to make their lives easier if they're thinking of a particular stream. They kind of say, if you're thinking about this, oh, here's a good package for you, but you're not bound to it if you, right. So yeah, okay. Elin, back to you.
Okay, I think the last question that I'm going to take from the audience that I think maybe many students would be interested in finding out is, are there financial support for attending law school for students who come from modest backgrounds? So if you can maybe talk about financial support offered at each of the law school a little bit.
Yeah, every school will have some sort of financial aid opportunities provided by the school for students. We will always expect that you would take advantage of the provincial loan programs from the province that you're from first, because the interest rates on that are usually very, very good, and they don't charge you usually any interest until after you graduate. So if you're getting something like OSAP now, that continues on into law school, so please take advantage of that. It's a good source of funds. Other than that, for U of T specifically, any aid that comes from the U of T for the law school is going to be based on financial need purely, which means that after you get into the law school, then you can fill out the financial aid form. We'll get your financial documents, and after you start, then we'll tell you here's how much you'll be getting. Just to know that you don't have to wait until after you're getting to know what that package may be. We have a financial aid calculator on our website, which even before you apply, you can see for the current year what that aid package may be, because we ask you the same sort of questions on the form online that OSAP will ask you. Just to give you a sense of that, last year, the average bursary was $16,000. That's a grant of money for U of T, which is about half our tuition. And one student last year got $28,000 in bursary money, which they didn't have to pay back, which meant their tuition was only $5,000. So again, there's a range for that. And then we have a separate aid program for students after they graduate, and that's described on our website. So Osgood.
Thank you. Yes, definitely OSAP as your first stop. A lot of students will get a professional line of credit from their banks. It usually doesn't have anything to do with your personal, like if you have assets and whatnot, it's based on like your acceptance letter. So, usually be successful in getting a loan like that. And we also have certainly a bursary program that all students, regardless of their financial situation, will apply for, because you never know. We also have emergency funding, winter funding. There's all kinds of funding. You just have to visit our financial services website. The last thing, and I can talk in more detail in the chat room, is our ICLP program. It's an income contingent loan program, which is you don't pay anything while you're studying at school. So there are some stipulations, of course, but it's a program designed for folks that, have very dire financial situations. And, of course, sticker shock is a big thing when it comes to law school. So Osgood is not the most expensive or the least expensive. So it's substantial for everybody all around the board, but that's a really great program that was supposed to be a pilot, and we're extending it. And it's just fantastic. I can talk a bit more about that in the breakout room. Thanks. Tara?
So we have primarily used scholarships for our financial aid. So in order to qualify for a scholarship, right now, all of our scholarships do require financial need to be eligible for the scholarships. We have scholarships for about a third to a half of our entire class. So there are a good number of scholarships, and there are a few full ride renewable scholarships as well. So when you can apply for scholarships without even being accepted, as long as you've applied, you can apply to the scholarships. Most of them have essay requirements that you'll need to do. So again, there's a lot going on as you're applying, including applying for scholarships. So make sure you have time set aside for that. And there are definitely financial aid scholarships available for individuals with a variety of backgrounds. And of course, all of our scholarships are on our website.
Spencer?
Yeah, and at Western Law, we offer the Dean of Law Scholarship to a number of students. We give out a number of scholarships at $20,000, and we also give out a few at $40,000. And in terms of other scholarships, some of these are named scholarships from law firms or other donors. And these are based on a few characteristics such as merit, financial need, and other specific criteria. So, yeah.
Great. And of course, all the details about our aid programs and the cost of going to each of our law schools will be on our website. And there's going to be a variation from school to school across the country. So just do a little legwork by going into our websites and looking under the money section of our websites at the law school itself, and you'll see all the details, the breakdowns, and the opportunities for funding support.
Thank you so much, Jerome, Vicky, Tara, and Spencer. At this point, I would like to open up the breakout room so the students can, interact with the individual law schools and maybe get their question that didn't get to in the chat answered. A reminder to the students, you can certainly jump between the breakout rooms. You're not stuck in one. So if you get your answer